For 7 weeks, the Seahawks had one of the best run defenses in the NFL, and then Sunday happened against the Baltimore Ravens. What is going on with Seattle's run defense regression, and how worried should fans be moving into the second half of the season? Rob Rang and I are going to be breaking it all down in our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in nearby Kirkland or south of the border in Mexico City. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks enduring one of the worst losses in the Pete Carroll era on Sunday. One of the big reasons why they lost by 34 points was their run defense. We're going to be diving into what went wrong and whether or not fans should be concerned moving into the second half of the season as Seattle regresses back towards the way they played last year. We're going to have Tell the Truth Tuesday wisdom and finally going to turn the page. Let's throw this game away, or as you said, Rob, flush it down the drain and move on to the Washington Commanders, a first look at Seattle's Week 10 opponent. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Before Sunday's game against the Ravens, the Seahawks ranked in the top 5 in yards per carry allowed against the run, and they were 7th in rushing yards allowed. It had been a remarkable turnaround for the Seahawks compared to their 30th overall ranking last year. But against the Ravens, and quite frankly, at times the last 3 weeks, Rob, the Seahawks have started to look more like their predecessor than the unit we saw in the first month and change, giving up 298 yards against the Ravens. And you look at the numbers right now, Rob, just these last 3 games for the Seahawks, they are giving up 193 rushing yards per game, 5.5 yards per carry. And this is probably what's most worrisome to me. 12 runs of 10 yards or more. They only had 8 of those the first 5 games of the season total, and they've had 12 in the last 3 games. And so this certainly is a concerning situation when you consider where Seattle was at defending the run last year. But Pete Carroll was saying yesterday, some of it's just the teams that they have played as well, and that does have some legitimacy to it. The Ravens and Browns are as good at running the football as anybody. But I guess the big question now, and we're going to look at some film from this game on Sunday, but looking at what has transpired the last few weeks, where is your panic meter at as far as Seattle's run defense?
Not very high. I mean, it is concerning, certainly, because, you have the San Francisco 49ers, who are also one of those teams that is dominant when it comes to running the football. You have the Philadelphia Eagles, Dallas Cowboys coming up, who also can absolutely run the ball. We've been talking about this all throughout the offseason, Corbin, but at the same time, the fact that the Seahawks made the trade for Leonard Williams, which I believe is going to help their run defense, and obviously he played in this game, but not as much as he will moving forward. And again, you touched upon it. I mean, these are 2 of the absolute best running teams in all of the NFL that the Seahawks have faced over the past 2 weeks. They beat the Cleveland Browns when the game was in Seattle. Obviously, they lost by a significant margin to the Baltimore Ravens. But again, we're talking about a historic quarterback in Lamar Jackson who absolutely changes the game. And again, the size, physicality, and as I'm going to argue a little bit later, just the exoticness of the way that the Baltimore Ravens called plays on defense as well as on offense. They did some really interesting things for them. And so I think that the Baltimore Ravens and previously the Cleveland Browns, especially those 2 clubs in particular, I think deserve an awful lot of credit for the fact that they did what they do and were effective against the Seahawks. And so I don't think this is a reason to panic. I think this is a reason to get angry, a reason to kind of, dedicate yourself to what that you do and decide, hey, are we going to be kind of a middling kind of a team if you're the Seahawks thinking about this, or are you going to really commit and be able to build upon these losses? And I think that the big trade for Leonard Williams to me suggests that the Seahawks knew that this was a problem and were trying to get ahead of it. It's just that the fact that they lost as ugly as they did against the Baltimore Ravens has a lot of people out there in a little bit of a panic mode at this point.
Yeah, my panic meter is pretty low. I'd say 1.5 out of 5. And it's not just because of who they played. But as I said, I do think that there is some legitimacy to that, whether fans want to hear that or not. These were two of the best running teams in the league. And I think Lamar Jackson, what he does to a defense as far as putting you in situations of conflict, there's not another quarterback in the NFL that can do that the way that he does with his running ability. And you can see it some. But from a positive standpoint, I thought Seattle's run defense was really good early in this game. They had several nice plays where they stopped Lamar Jackson. They stuffed the run game. They forced a couple of quick punts. And even after they gave up the first touchdown, they were able to get off the field with Boye Mafe's strip sack. And the run defense to that point, yeah, the Ravens had ripped off a couple of big plays, but one of them was Lamar Jackson's 23-yard run. I thought that the run defense was actually pretty solid for most of the first half. Where the issues came in the second half, and I think there was a number of things at play. I mean, Seahawks were on the field defensively over 40 minutes in this game. And when you're playing a team like this, as physical as Baltimore, it's going to wear you down. Your tackling is going to suffer. Your run fits are going to suffer. So we are not allowed to show full plays on all 22, but what we can do is we can show some stills. And Rob, one play that jumped out to me literally to start the second half for the Seahawks. And this was, I believe, if I remember correctly, this was the Gus Edwards run. Yeah, at the beginning of the third quarter, Gus Edwards taking a handoff to the right. And you can see those watching on YouTube, I have a diagram. That's Dre'Mont Jones with his back turned away from the run. He is getting absolutely demolished by a double team. And then the guard and tackle on the right side, they've got their guys sealed. The only player there to stop Gus Edwards is Quandre Diggs, and Diggs completely whiffs on this play. Devin Witherspoon misses his tackle, and next thing you know, this is turned into a 42-yard gain. So that play kind of showcased, Rob, everything that was going wrong for the Seahawks in the second half. They were getting abused at the line of scrimmage, especially with double teams. They weren't making tackles. They were taking poor pursuit angles, and Baltimore absolutely ripped them to shreds. Another example with Keaton Mitchell in the backfield. This one, Boye Mafe and Mario Edwards had an opportunity to get to Mitchell at the line of scrimmage. They both were closing in on him, but they didn't make the play. And if you look behind them, there's absolutely nobody there to make a play once Mitchell gets past those players. Jamal Adams got sucked inside. Look at all the green that's in front of Keaton Mitchell, who's got elite speed at the running back position. And that made it an easy 40-yard touchdown. So there were a number of issues at play in the second half of the Seahawks. The missed tackles, the poor pursuit angles, getting themselves in bad position, not being able to get off blocks. So I guess the good news is there's nowhere to go but up with the way that they were playing there in the second half against the run.
No, exactly. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit in a moment here when we have our Tell the Truth Tuesdays. And I'm going to focus in the defensive side of the ball because you just demonstrated some of the kind of exotic, and by exotic, I just mean different. I don't mean that this is something new and that you've never seen it before. Double team blocks have been around since the dawn of good football, but the Seahawks were eaten alive by the double team blocks. And I tried to articulate this in yesterday's show, Corbin, when I said that I thought this was the varsity versus the JV. I thought that the way the Baltimore Ravens kind of picked apart the Seahawks, they didn't just beat the Seahawks in some of the areas and where Seattle has struggled. They went against some of Seattle's absolute best players. They defeated Dre'Mont Jones, who of course signed for, kind of not record numbers, but certainly the biggest numbers of any free agent last 5 years from a Seattle perspective. They attacked Bobby Wagner, a future Hall of Famer. They attacked Jamal Adams. They attacked Devon Witherspoon. They attacked Leonard Williams. They attacked the best players that the Seahawks have on defense, and they did it with an awful lot of double team blocks, and the Seahawks, frankly, struggled to adjust to that. And so that is one of the reasons why that they were able to run the ball as effectively quickly as they were with their running backs. And then again, Lamar Jackson is just a cheat code. I think anybody who watched the game and saw when Boye Mafe really had him dead to rights, 31 of the 32 starting NFL quarterbacks would have been sacked on that one particular play. That anybody who watched that game, it should be going in replay in your brain. I know that it certainly is for Corbin and I. Then that was a demonstration of just the different level of athletic ability that he possesses and what makes it so difficult to try to game plan for a team as athletic as the Baltimore Ravens are.
Yeah, and going off what you said about attacking various players, they also went after some of the weak points for the Seahawks defense because the Ravens are well coached. And I'm thinking the first touchdown run in this game, we talked about it yesterday real quick. The Seahawks were just out leveraged on this. I've got a pink spot there in the B gap on the play side that the Seahawks did not have anybody accounting for. Jordan Brooks was trying to go over and get into that gap, but Darrell Taylor got absolutely demolished. Looking at this next still, he is the middle green rectangle there. You can see the double team blowing him up. Jordan Brooks is going to end up getting reached by one of those blockers coming off that double team. Bobby Wagner is outside and isn't able to get inside to make a play. So this is an easy touchdown for Gus Edwards. But that was a play where they were out leveraged to an extent and they were out gapped. And so everything went wrong at some point for the Seahawks run defense. If there's any consolation here, the Ravens do this to everybody. That's just what they do. This is a really darn good football team that knows how to run the football. They know how to scheme it up. And that Lamar Jackson effect as well. It just complicates your effort schematically to try to slow down the rest of Baltimore's run game. Turn the page. This has been a good run defense most of the season. I wouldn't put too much stock in one game, and there's a lot they can learn from this. Just tackle better, and they have a much better performance overall. Coming up next is Tell the Truth Tuesday. We're going to dish out our final words of wisdom, our final thoughts coming out of Sunday's blowout loss to the Ravens, and start looking towards Week 10 with the Commanders. Don't go away. You're listening to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Prize Picks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America, and it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks is really simple to play, and I can make my picks and submit an entry in less than 60 seconds. And now that the NBA season is here, you can pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, I can pick LeBron James and Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made and receptions. This week on Prize Picks, I'm hoping Ken Walker III will finally bust out after a rough game against the Ravens. I've got him eclipsing 90 rushing yards against the Commanders' somewhat porous defense. Prize Picks is an absolute blast each week, and it's an easy way to enjoy daily fantasy without any hassle and land quick winnings. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. You're listening to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Don't forget, tomorrow, it's our latest Matchup Wednesday installment. The Commanders we'll be talking about later. They are a much different looking team personnel-wise, at least on the defensive side of the ball. We'll be diving into all the key positional battles to watch heading into Seattle versus Washington in Week 10. You won't want to miss it. It's Tell the Truth Tuesday, and when you lose by 34 points to any team, let alone on the road, that kind of a stinker, there's plenty of honesty that needs to be dished out. So, Rob, I'm going to give you the mic here first. Your first take here for Tell the Truth Tuesday.
Well, I appreciate Corbin as always. And I thought that we had, you mentioned this in yesterday's show, I think that we had like 72, 74 different questions that were posed to us, and so I just, on our Monday mailbag. And so there was a couple of them that talked about scheme. And, my specialty is always going to be player personnel rather than scheme. I am always going to be more about the Jimmies and Joes and the X's and O's, but I was kind of just astounded by some of the things that I saw by the Baltimore Ravens, because I thought from a physicality standpoint, they had this game won. they were the more physical team. And 9 times out of 10, I think the more physical team wins football games. To me, it's not much rocket science in that regard. But I also thought that there were some really exotic and kind of fun things, frankly. If you're not just a hardcore Seahawks fan, some things that the Baltimore Ravens did that just made me want to sit back in awe. I felt like I was in a museum or something, just kind of looking at art here. And I'm not going to, geek out on you guys too much, but I just wanted to kind of talk about the very first third down opportunity the Seahawks had on offense. And those of you that remember, it was a play that Geno Smith threw a very catchable ball that JSN, caught it, then lost it, and then caught it again, but as he was walking out of bounds. And so it, of course, resulted in a Seahawks punt. And so to me, if you were going to just look at this from an X's and O standpoint and you want to just call it a play, then this would be called basically a cover zero zone blitz. But there's a lot of people out there who will use terms like that. Some of them who use this term know what it actually means, and some of them don't. So what does it mean? So cover zero basically means that there's not going to be anybody playing deep. They're all going to be kind of pressed up close. And Seattle has its basic 5 offensive linemen. They have the tight end, Noah Split, who's just splits the tad outside of the left tackle, Charles Cross. We know the Seattle's top offensive lineman, the 5-man rotation that they have. Zach Charbonnet is in the backfield. Seattle has the primary 3 wide receivers to the right. Lockett initially is out wide. He goes in motion. That leaves DK Metcalf now the widest, Jackson Smith and Jigba in the slot. Baltimore, on the other hand, is going to counter with 7 men in the box. They're going to have their 4 defensive linemen. Jadeveon Clowney, who we talked about, was going to be an absolute factor in this game. And he, in my opinion, as good as Justin Matabuke was, Clowney was absolutely a factor in this football game. But Clowney, Michael Pierce, Justin Matabuke, and then Jason or Odafe Owe lined up as their primary 4. It was the inside linebacker. Roquan Smith was lined up over the right guard. Again, the new right guard in this situation. Patrick Queen is threatening to blitz behind Pierce and Matabuke right up the middle. And their best cornerback, Marlon Humphrey, is lined up just a yard off of Noah Fant. And that's interesting, that the fact that they lined up their primary outside cornerback inside on the tight end, Noah Fant. So as Geno Smith barks out the call, Queen slides to his right to get on the other side of Humphrey and Fant, threatening Cross and the strong safety Kyle Hamilton, who was following Tyler Lockett in motion. Then he suddenly blitzes. And so when that changes everything, so suddenly the Seahawks are facing 2 outside blitzers, and the big guys, Michael Pierce and Justin Matabuke, they're the guys who actually drop into coverage. That's the zone blitz element of this. It's an exotic blitz right off the bat. The Seahawks actually picked it up beautifully. Noah Fant, who has not always been known for his pass blocking acumen, he picks up, I believe it was Matabuke, he picks him up. It was Odafe picks him up. Zach Charbonnet, as a rookie running back, does a great job of picking up Kyle Hamilton, knocks him to the ground. Geno Smith throws a perfect strike to Jackson Smith and Jigba, who again bobbles the ball. So to me, Corbin, what this is demonstrating is the fact that the Seahawks were on it early on. The Baltimore Ravens just executed at a different level. And again, when you have physicality and execution on your side, as well as the home crowd, then it was just basically the very first series of the game from a Seahawks perspective. It just kind of demonstrated what was going to happen the rest of the game. The Baltimore Ravens, like as I said before, varsity versus JV, the Baltimore Ravens just basically flexed in this game. They beat the Seahawks where it hurts the most by being more physical, by being smarter, by being more committed. That's why they won this game going outright.
If you love film and you love X and O's breakdowns, this is going to be the show for you. And I might be a little bit off my rocker today compared to normal, Robin, talking about this as far as just frustration. I watched this all 22 tape from this game 3 full times. And I was trying to do charting on this because I felt like in the game watching that Seattle did not try to attack the middle of the field at all in their passing game. And unfortunately, my study ended up proving my initial thoughts correct. And that tells me right now, Geno Smith is making mistakes. Geno Smith is not without blame, but Shane Waldron has been a far bigger problem in the last few games, particularly this game on Sunday. than what Geno Smith has been, because he is not putting his quarterback in a position to succeed. He is not helping him. You knew this defense, Rob, was going to be very aggressive. You knew they were going to sprinkle in some exotic blitzes. You knew that they were going to be tough to block at the line of scrimmage. So how do you help out your quarterback in that situation? Provide some security blankets, provide some quick hitters, get your tight ends involved. That was something the Seahawks didn't really do either. But I'm going to look at one of the first drives in this game. And again, we cannot show the entire play. I wish we could, but that's just the way things go. But I can show you stills. And this play early in the football game, Geno Smith had already stepped up in the pocket a little bit. You have one of the interior defenders, I believe in this case it was Matabuke, had his inside shoulder free. So it looks like there might be a lane for Smith to run. There's not. If you watch the end zone film, it's not there. But they have 3 route runners or 3 routes on this play. They had 7 guys blocking. They had 2 tight ends in the backfield, and Geno Smith was still under pressure, but there's not an outlet for him. Geno Smith was not given an outlet. Look at the middle of the field. They did not attack it. I counted 2 crossers in this game that they ran. Like, they didn't even try to test the linebackers at all to see if they could stretch them in the passing game. They didn't do it horizontally. And another example, this was later in the half. Here's another play. Geno Smith actually has an okay pocket. Stone Forsythe's going to get pushed back into him here in just a second. He's trying to hold on to the ball and let his receivers get open, but all 4 of them are outside the hashes. There's nothing going on in the middle again. And this is going against quarter coverage. The Ravens are like, this is like stealing candy from a baby. Another play here. Later in the half, Geno Smith right at the end of his drop back. This was 3rd and 21. Questionable if the Seahawks should have been trying to throw the ball downfield in this case. Geno gets strip sacked immediately at the end of his drop by Kyle Van Noy. I think he has a chance to get the ball to DK Metcalf here, but it doesn't work out. So I want to emphasize the offensive line fits into this some, but this is another situation where, Rob, I felt like Shane Waldron could have just like, you know what? We're going to run the ball here. We're going to run a draw. We're going to do a quick, a safe pass. We're going to punt the football, and we're not going to let the Ravens get the ball here. This was a risky play call in a 3rd and 21 situation, knowing the way that the defense had been getting after Geno Smith, and it ended up backfiring on them. And one other play to look at, this was in the second half, another play where you've got 3 routes that are being ran. The Seahawks have max protection to get 7 guys in there. And Geno looks like at the top of his drop that he's got good protection in front of it, but the Ravens are quickly going to squeeze this down. The receivers don't get open, and there's, again, no outlet in the middle of the field for Geno Smith. And so that was something that had me scratching my bald head coming out of this all-22 thing. I'm watching the game. Why is the middle of the field being ignored? And it was the entire football game. It felt like Shane Waldron played into the Ravens' strengths in this football game. And so Geno Smith had a rough performance. He made mistakes. There were some throws he should have completed. But he's getting put in a position he cannot win by Shane Waldron's play calling, coupled with the offensive line not doing their job, not playing well. But the play caller can help the offensive line too. Get the ball out quickly, have some options in the middle of the field. They completely ignored it. So I'll have some other takes real quick, but that really was the thing I wanted to sell home. That was the thing coming out of this game, more so than the run defense, watching just like, why are we not attacking the middle of the field? Why is Shane Waldron saying, let's run everything outside the hashes? I know that those are considered easier passes, but the Ravens were giving it to you, and you weren't even attempting to make those passes in the middle of the field. It felt like they were set to fail from the outset.
I 100% agree. I think that there's a lot of Seahawks fans out there who, anytime you mention the name D. Eskridge, they are going to freak out. But I think this is one of the kind of games that you had to use guys who have some shiftiness, guys who have some, break a tackle, make a big play kind of opportunities. I would have loved to have seen a few throws to a Kenneth Walker, to, again, a D. Eskridge, somebody who might be able to make one guy miss and be able to attack downfield. But Corbin, I don't want to focus too much just on, some of the negatives. There's obviously many about the Seahawks loss here. So I want to focus in on one of the silver linings of this football game. And of course, the Seahawks made a massive trade for Leonard Williams. And if you look at the statistics, he was not that spectacular in this particular game, but he was an eyelash away from 3 different tackles for loss. His ability to be a penetrator and create some big plays behind the line of scrimmage, not his own tackles for loss, but his ability to get upfield, create a tackle for loss on Lamar Jackson, essentially a sack, although it didn't go down as that, create a tackle for loss on the running back Gus Edwards, although again, it didn't go down as a true tackle for loss, but I think it was 6 inches above the line of scrimmage, essentially. He had 3 different times that he basically created tackles for loss, and he wasn't on the field that much. Now, there definitely were some ugly snaps for him as well. I mentioned in yesterday's show that he got buckled on an excellent double team block by the Baltimore Ravens that resulted in Gus Edwards' second touchdown run of the game. But still, if the Seahawks were hoping for some big plays from Leonard Williams, it didn't actually happen in this game. But it's so close that it makes you believe that their investment in the trade, their investment possibly, if they decide to re-sign him, that could be dollars well spent, because he's every bit the difference-making player that the Seahawks were hoping for when they made that big trade with the New York Giants.
My last take here is going to be something that's been a negative development on the field, but I'm going to take a little bit of a positive spin with it real quick. Pete Carroll was talking about yesterday that DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett missing all the practice time they've had, that has certainly contributed to some of the communication issues that we've seen out there with Geno Smith. And this has been a persistent problem. By this stage of the season, you'd think that stuff is fixed. And so, yeah, that's a negative. But my positive here, I still believe the Seahawks have as much receiving talent as any team in the NFL. You got to put them in position where they can make plays. And I felt like Shane Waldron did not do that in this football game, given what the Ravens were doing defensively. But still, the positive for me here is that if you can just eliminate those couple mistakes a game where you aren't getting turnovers or near turnovers because guys are not on the same page, it's just going to help this offense run much more smoothly in general. Those plays have been getting them off schedule, or it's been turning the ball over completely, which, again, Pete Carroll does not want that to happen. So this team can still be a high-powered offense, but I think this is one of the biggest things that has to be corrected. They've got to look back at what is going wrong communication-wise. Is there a way that we can right now smooth things out that regard for everybody? Is the verbiage too much, or is there a way that we're communicating that isn't working? You got to tackle that. I think if you can fix that issue, this offense can still be really good, but they're not going anywhere if they aren't getting the production that they can get out of DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Smith and Jigba starting to get involved, but now you got to have your 2-star receivers start getting going. And a big problem with that has been the communication. So that's been negative, but I still think that that's something that can be smoothed out, that can be an easy fix, but that needs to be something that is emphasized for the Seahawks moving forward. Up next, we're going to take a look at the Washington Commanders coming up into Week 10. What's new, looking at what to expect on offense and defense as well coming into Week 10. Don't go away. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast. It's Week 10 of the NFL season. We've got incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads such as the Seahawks versus Commanders this upcoming week, player props, including Rookie of the Year, MVP, and many other awards, over-unders, and much more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and enjoy the NFL season with an offer you won't want to miss. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Tuesday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Don't forget, coming up tomorrow, we'll be diving into all the key positional battles to watch on Matchup Wednesday. Seahawks hosting the Commanders, looking to bounce back in Week 10. You won't want to miss it. Speaking of the Commanders, you want to talk about a team, when we do the What's New segment, usually it's looking at the moves that were made in the offseason, but most of the big moves that were made by the Commanders just happened recently, jettisoning 2 of their best defensive players at the trade deadline, dealing Chase Young and Montez Sweat to the 49ers and Bears, respectively. Those 2 are still their top 2 sack producers this season. They're just no longer on the roster. So, Rob, this is a team that's got a new starting quarterback this year. They've got a lot of new starters now on defense that they're starting to sprinkle in. It's going to be a much different looking team, even than what we would have seen in Week 1, Week 2 earlier this year.
Yeah, exactly. If we were having this conversation in Week 1, I would have been talking about Sam Howell. I'd be talking about the new offensive coordinator, Eric Bieniemy, of course, who was with the Kansas City Chiefs the last couple of years. But as you said, I mean, Washington traded away Montez Sweat and Chase Young, two former first round picks. And so this is a completely different team just from the last couple of weeks. So I'm fascinated to see what Ron Rivera, what Jack Del Rio, the defensive minded head coach, certainly defensive minded defensive coordinator, former head coach, Pete Carroll, of course, is very, very familiar with their USC days back in the day. I'm fascinated to see how Washington is able to make some adjustments here, because they're going to be facing a Seahawks team that's smarting right now, that is hurting right now, and is eager to be back home in the friendly confines of their home stadium, Lumen Field, and be able to kind of flex a little bit themselves. And so I'm going to focus in here for just a moment on Sam Howell, just because at the quarterback position, I think he was one of the quarterbacks that I was pretty intrigued by a year ago. This is a guy who does have good accuracy. Washington is going to try and play basically the exact same thing that Cleveland and Baltimore did. They want to run the football. They want to be able to do some play action pass and be able to take advantage of the fact that they do have some pretty dynamic wide receivers. But at the same time, this is a team that wants to establish the run right off the bat. And so I'm going to be fascinated to see how they are able to do so against a Seahawks team that right now that has got to be all in trying to slow down the run and allow that crowd to be able to kind of put a little bit of pressure itself. If Seattle's defensive line can't do it, then the Seattle crowd itself be able to provide a little bit of pressure on the quarterback.
Those that remember the 2022 draft, Sam Howell was a player that kind of rocketed up my draft boards as the pre-draft process went on. And I went back and watched North Carolina tape, both from his sophomore season, his junior season. And he didn't have the same production as junior year. They lost a lot of receiving talent, but you could see the arm talent. You could see the accuracy and the athleticism. He's averaging 5 yards per carry this year. He's a guy that can break tackles. I believe he has 13 missed tackles forced, according to Pro Football Focus. So he is not just a drop back passer. Has he had some issues with interceptions? Absolutely. But this is his first year as a starter, new offensive coordinator. There were going to be some mistakes sprinkled in. I think that's been one of the positives for the Commanders. They've been very aggressive passing on first downs. In fact, 71% of their first downs this year, they have thrown the football. That is the highest rate in the NFL. So you want to talk about a team putting faith in their first-year starting quarterback. The Commanders have done that with Sam Howell. Now, they will hand the football off to their running backs. They've got a number of talented guys, Robinson from Alabama being one of them. They've also got Antonio Gibson still there. He hasn't played as big of a role this year, but they've got a number of running backs that they can turn to that also can catch the football. But Sam Howell, the passing game, Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, Jahan Dotson, this is a team that has really adapted to be more of a passing team because that is where their strength has lied. And as far as the run game goes, I mentioned with Robinson and some of the other weapons they have, this is a very zone-centric team. A lot of the teams the Seahawks have played recently are more 50-50. 68% of the runs this year for Washington have been zone plays. So this is one of those teams that really has a bread and butter scheme-wise on the ground, and they prefer the zone. Makes things a little easier from a game planning perspective. At the same time, Washington's pretty good at running those zone plays. And we saw what happened last week. The Ravens had success in their zone runs against the Seahawks as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the differences between the Baltimore Ravens and how dominant they are in the running game. And again, this Washington Commanders team that, may not have the big names. They don't have an Odell Beckham, for example, at the wide receiver position. But what they do have is a great deal of variety. As you mentioned, Sam Howell, I mean, he was a quarterback that I was very high on as well. He wound up being drafted in the 7th round. I think that's interesting to kind of remember here because he has been productive as a starter for Washington. But one of the things I liked about him, not only the arm talent that you mentioned before, just the grit as a runner, it's just the fact that he distributes the football. Corbin, they've thrown 14 touchdowns so far this season, but nobody on their team has more than 3 touchdown receptions. You got 3 to the tight end, Logan Thomas. We all know how much Seattle struggles to cover the tight ends. Then you got 3 more to Jahan Dotson, 2nd round pick a couple of years ago, speedster out of Penn State. You got 2 to the running back, Brian Robinson. As you mentioned, he has kind of taken over the title as Washington's leading running back. 2 more to Curtis Samuel, 2 more to Terry McLaurin. I mean, they are really distributing. Sam Howell is really distributing the football very, very well. I think that kind of plays into Seattle's hands here because, as you mentioned about Seattle having great talent at the wide receiver position, they have great talent at the cornerback position as well. And they don't have any one guy, Washington speaking, they don't have any one guy that they're going to lean on. So again, that to me makes this a team that Seattle should be able to take full advantage of. There's not been a lot of transition on offense. All the transition has been on defense. And it's going to be interesting to see who is going to be able to kind of step up now that Chase Young and Montez Sweat are playing elsewhere.
Yeah, we'll get to the defense in a second. I just want to throw this out there. This is an interesting nugget. The Commanders are 25th in third down conversion rate, so they're not much better than the Seahawks. They've had issues sustaining drives this season, but they have the 7th highest explosive play rate in the NFL at 10.77%. So this is one of those feast or famine offenses. And ask the Eagles, who barely squeaked out wins against them twice. This is a team that can get the ball downfield, especially in the passing game with the weapons they have. Howell's got the arm strength to do it. So this is a team that has kind of lived by the explosive and died by the explosive. And really that leaks over to the defensive side of the football too. The Commanders, even with Chase Young and Montez Sweat, were in the bottom 3 in the NFL in passing yards allowed. They have been susceptible to chunk plays in the passing game. Now that you take away their 2 best edge rushers, that's something that you would think is going to be an even bigger problem for the Commanders to try to mask. And some of that's been the coverages too. This is a team that broke in a first-round pick in Emmanuel Forbes as one of their starters on the outside. They have a lot of new faces in the secondary. They have played almost a 50-50 split with middle of field open and middle field closed coverages. It hasn't really mattered what they've done, though, from an efficiency and effectiveness standpoint. Again, they're dead last right now in the NFL in passing yards allowed, and a lot of those coming through the air. They give up a lot of chunk plays. It hasn't mattered what coverage they've been in. This isn't the Bengals. This isn't the Ravens. This isn't the Browns. Those teams that are multiple that are really good in a number of different things. This Commanders defense has struggled, and they haven't been able to become a master at any of their coverages, and it's resulted in a lot of big plays.
It has, but again, remember who they are playing up against. I mean, this is in the NFC East. You're going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, as you mentioned twice. You're going up against the Dallas Cowboys. You're going up against some explosive offenses. And then again, when you have the 2 cornerbacks, young cornerbacks that they have, Emmanuel Forbes is their rookie this year. He's second on the team in terms of passes defense. He's only started 2 games. This is a guy who's an absolute ball hawk. He's got really long arms, really quick hands. He is able to pass us away just as they are going to be collected in. The way that Trey Brown did against the Cleveland Browns, against the Baltimore Ravens, even in that loss a week ago. And then Benjamin St. Juste, the cornerback that you and I were both very high on, that we thought that the Seahawks should be considering. He has been incredibly productive for them as well. Without that exterior pass rush, it's really going to be on Jonathan Allen and De'Ron Payne, former Alabama teammates, former first-round picks, who have taken over for Washington as the leaders in the defense. We know that the Seahawks struggled to protect the A and B gaps in the interior. Corbin, you just did a great job of kind of illustrating how Seattle has to attack the middle of the defense. I think that they're going to be trying to do exactly that against Washington, but to be able to attack the middle with their tight ends, with their running backs, they got to block the middle first. And again, De'Ron Payne and Jonathan Allen, especially Allen in terms of pass rush, those are formidable players that the Seahawks have to be able to slow them down if they're going to have any chance of success in attacking the middle of the Washington defense.
As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Tomorrow, it'll be Matchup Wednesday. We're going to dive into all the key positional battles to watch as the Seahawks get ready to face the Commanders at Lumen Field. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for listening in and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Go Hawks.